Hi everyone, my name is Ciana McConnell and today I'll be presenting to you some information on Jeffrey Dahmer. So Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer and sex offender. He was born May 21st, 1960, and between the years of 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 males. He was found guilty of rape, dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism. Jeffrey Dahmer had a mostly normal childhood. He became withdrawn and uncommunicative as he got older. He seemed to lack interest in his hobbies and social interactions. He examined animal carcasses for fun and began drinking heavily in high school. He graduated high school in 1978, and 3 weeks later he committed his first murder. His parents also had a divorce that summer, and Jeffrey was left alone in his family home. Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder occurred in 1978 when he picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks and took him home for a beer. Hicks decided to leave, and Dahmer hit him in the back of the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. Dahmer was unwilling to let Hicks leave, and his decision to murder Hicks was to stop him from leaving. Dahmer then dissected, dissolved, and pulverized and scattered the remains of Hicks in his backyard. As for Dahmer's adulthood, he went to college but dropped out due to his issues with alcoholism. He served in the Army from 1979 to 1981 but was discharged for his issues with drinking. He lived with his grandmother in Wisconsin after that. While living with his grandmother, he spent a lot of his time at gay bathhouses where he would drug and rape men. He was arrested twice for indecent exposure in 1982 and 1986. His second murder victim was in 1987, a man named Stephen Tuomi. According to Dahmer, he has no memory of killing that young man. He later murdered 2 more people in 1988, another in 1989, and 4 more in 1990. It was at this point in Dahmer's life where he began to develop many bad habits. He began to lure men from bars, or he would hire prostitutes whom he then drugged, raped, and strangled. This was when he began having sex with the corpses. He took photos of the dismemberment process. He preserved victims' skulls and genitals for display in his home. And he then began to consume some parts of his victims. Dahmer also became very experimental in murdering and torturing his victims. For example, he would drill holes into their heads and inject hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains. Dahmer was later charged with a sex offense. He drugged and fondled a 13-year-old boy. He was sentenced to 5 years probation, 1 year at a work release camp, and then was required to register as a sex offender. Despite being under probation, his officer never noticed that Dahmer was a murderer. In 1991, Dahmer had a close call when neighbors complained of bad smells and strange noises coming from his apartment. One of his victims, who was lobotomized, made it onto the street, but Dahmer managed to convince his neighbors and the police that it was a very drunk boyfriend. The police also failed to run a background check on Dahmer at this time. Tracy Edwards was Dahmer's last intended victim. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer offered Edwards cash in exchange for his company. Dahmer then forced Edwards into his bedroom with a butcher knife, but Edwards managed to escape and found the police. The police then found pictures of Dahmer's prior victims in his apartment. Later at the apartment, the police found several severed heads in the fridge. They found photographs of Dahmer's previous victims. They found more human remains in the fridge, a total of 7 skulls in the apartment, and a human heart in the freezer. Jeffrey Dahmer was charged with 15 murder charges. His trial began January 30th, 1992, where Dahmer pled insanity, but the judge found him sane and guilty. He was sentenced to 15 life terms, a total of 957 years in prison. He entered a guilty plea for the murder of his first victim, Hicks, and received an additional life sentence. Dahmer served out his sentence at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Dahmer expressed remorse and declared himself a born-again Christian, but he was attacked twice by fellow inmates. One inmate attempted to slice his throat open, but he survived, and later he was attacked a second time while cleaning showers with another inmate named Christopher Scarver, shown in the picture here. And due to a severe blow to the head, Dahmer died on November 28, 1994, on his way to the hospital. Explaining the motivation of serial killers can be extremely difficult to do. I have here a definition of social learning theory, which emphasizes the importance of observing and modeling the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of behaviors. It also indicates an importance on rewards and punishment that may explain resulting behavior. It's become clear in my research that Dahmer had severe abandonment issues, mainly due to his parents' divorce, and Dahmer's murder attempts and sexual aggression and rape were most likely an attempt at attention and a way to feel close. In many of his murders, he would murder the young men because he did not want them to leave. That was definitely the case with his first murder, Hicks, who he hit in the back of the head because the man was attempting to leave. This seems to be the case with most of Dahmer's murders. A large amount of Dahmer's violence can be attributed to his alcohol abuse. Alcohol was used in the majority of his crimes. He was a severe alcoholic. He murdered and raped young men while under the influence of alcohol. Alcohol is the drug most consistently linked with aggressive behavior. Half to 2/3 of all sexual violence cases involve alcohol abuse, and alcohol has an acute and chronic biological effect on the brain's functioning, including memory, which may explain the case where Dahmer did not remember murdering one of his victims, Stephen Tuomi. Next, with Dahmer and his rape cases, there are psychiatric explanations of rape, which often examine unresolved needs and conflicts in the offender's past. In Dahmer's case, his unfulfilled needs for acceptance, affection, and intimacy may have resulted in depression and later resulted in his crimes. Rape offender behavior can also be classified into one of 5 categories. The category that appears to fit Dahmer the best would be power reassurance, which is defined as an underlying lack of confidence in inadequacy and a misguided belief that the sex act is consensual. Rape was another method that Dahmer used to feel closer to his victims and to feel as though he were not alone. As for consuming his victims, that was another method that he used in order to feel close to his victims so that he could feel as though there was a part of them with him at all times. Most of his actions in both murder and sexual assault appear to be a strange cry for help. He wanted attention and he wanted companionship, and in his mind, this was the best way to achieve that. As for Dahmer's insanity defense, he attempted an insanity plea in 1992. Unfortunately for Dahmer, this was at a time where this was after the 1981 turning point for American opinion on the insanity plea with John W. Hinckley Jr. John Hinckley Jr. shot President Ronald Reagan in 1981 in order to impress the actress Jodie Foster. He then pled insanity and received that insanity plea, but 76% of Americans felt that justice had not been served in this case. And so it is no surprise that several years later, when Dahmer was convicted of, or was judged for homicide, that he did not receive the insanity plea. Judges are extremely reluctant to return an insanity verdict, especially in homicide cases. Jeffrey Dahmer is definitely an interesting case of homicide and rape. He is one of the most infamous and prolific serial killers of the 20th century, and I hope you learned something interesting in my presentation. Thank you. And here are my citations.